Long before Rome ruled the Mediterranean, before legions marched through Gaul or emperors dined in marble halls, there was another great city. A city born not from conquest, but from trade. A city whose ships darkened every corner of the sea, and whose influence stretched from the coasts of Africa to the silver mines of Iberia. This city was Carthage. Its story begins not in Africa, but in the distant lands of the eastern Mediterranean. There, in the ancient city of Tyre, a Phoenician queen named Elissa, known to some as Dido, fled betrayal and murder. Her brother Pygmalion had seized the throne and killed her husband. Fearing for her life, she gathered loyal followers, took what treasure she could, and escaped by sea. They sailed westward, past Cyprus, past Crete, past Greece and Sicily, until they reached the shores of North Africa. There, according to legend, Dido purchased land from the local Berber king. He offered her only as much land as could be covered by an ox hide, a cruel joke meant to cheat the foreign queen. But Dido was clever. She cut the ox hide into impossibly thin strips and laid them end to end, encircling a wide area of land. The king was astonished, but her claim was honored, and on this land Carthage was born. In its early days, Carthage was a colony of Tyre, a trading post on the edge of the known world. But Tyre's power waned, and Carthage began to grow on its own terms. It became the jewel of the western Mediterranean, the queen of commerce. The city's harbors were engineering marvels, with circular docks for warships and vast piers for merchant fleets. Its navy was unmatched, its coinage respected, its markets bursting with goods from every land. Carthage did not seek empire in the way Rome later would. It built its strength through alliance, trade, and economic dominance. It planted colonies along the coasts of North Africa, Sardinia, Corsica, and Spain. It harvested the wealth of the sea and the land, exporting olive oil, wine, ceramics, glass, and precious dyes. It worshipped gods older than Olympus, like Baal-Hamon and Tanit, and kept rituals that to outsiders seemed strange, even frightening. Carthage was a place where seafaring skill met financial genius, where merchants governed and sailors were revered. The ruling class, known as the Sophites, held office in pairs and followed a constitution that balanced elite power with popular oversight. Their system of government impressed even the great Aristotle, who described it as one of the best he had seen. Trade routes from Carthage extended far beyond what many could imagine. Their ships reached the tin-rich isles of Britain, the fish-laden shores of Mauritania, and possibly even beyond the Strait of Gibraltar. With every voyage, the city grew richer and more confident, its population swelling, its influence deepening. Its urban center was no less impressive. Streets were laid out in grids, homes built with flowing water systems, and public buildings adorned with intricate mosaics. Artisans and craftsmen thrived, producing goods that were not only functional, but also beautiful. Carthaginian purple dye, extracted from murex shells, was worth its weight in gold and draped the robes of kings and priests. But such prosperity attracted envy, and such power provoked challenge. The Greeks in Sicily viewed Carthage as a rival to be checked, not a neighbor to be respected. They launched repeated campaigns against Carthaginian holdings, igniting a centuries-long struggle for dominance of the island. Carthage responded with resilience. Its generals, though often restrained by the merchant elite, proved adaptable and cunning. Strategic marriages and alliances were arranged with local tribes and foreign cities. Fortresses were built, fleets expanded, and armies trained for the realities of land warfare in foreign territories. Despite its strength, the city never lost sight of its origins. Religious festivals honoring its founding queen Dido were held regularly, blending myth with civic pride. Children were taught the tale of the ox hide, of cleverness over brute force, and of the sea's endless promise. Within the city walls, Carthage was a melting pot of cultures. Phoenicians, Berbers, Greeks, and others lived and traded together. This diversity enriched Carthaginian society, making it both flexible and resilient. Laws were written in Punic, but the voices of many tongues echoed in its markets. Yet beneath this vibrant surface, tension simmered. The reliance on mercenary troops created uncertainty during times of conflict. Loyalty bought with silver could vanish with defeat. And the increasing need for new markets and resources pushed Carthage into dangerous territory. By the 4th century BCE, Carthage had become more than a city. It was an idea, a beacon of wealth and ingenuity, admired and feared by all who encountered it. Its flag flew over dozens of ports, its coins clinked in markets from Spain to Syria, and its name stirred both admiration and dread. And yet across the sea, a new force was stirring. A city built on discipline and ambition, a republic growing in strength, whose people valued war not for profit but for glory. Rome was watching, calculating, and preparing. The story of Carthage would soon become a story of war, of empires in collision, and of the greatest rivalry the ancient world would ever witness. But for now, Carthage stood proud and unchallenged, its sails catching the winds of destiny. In the centuries following its founding, Carthage did not merely grow. It expanded with a steady, deliberate pace, reaching further along the Mediterranean's southern coast and establishing its authority without needing the brute force of conquest. Every new settlement it founded was like a seed planted along a vast maritime web, linking Carthage to ports, resources, and allies in every direction. The sea was not a border for the Carthaginians, but a highway of opportunity, and their ships were as common as the stars overhead. As Carthage pushed outward, the western Mediterranean became its playground and battleground. The island of Sicily, lying at the heart of the sea, was a jewel that neither Carthage nor its Greek rivals could ignore. While Carthage controlled much of western Sicily through treaties and colonies, Greek city-states like Syracuse held the east. This uneasy balance of power teetered with every new alliance, every trade dispute, every change in leadership. The first true conflict erupted in the late 6th century BCE, when the Greeks of Sicily began to encroach upon Carthaginian allies. Carthage, recognizing the threat, sent armies across the sea. These early wars were brutal and inconclusive, fought with hoplite tactics and bolstered by mercenaries who often changed sides. The island became a graveyard of ambitions, soaked in blood, yet never fully claimed by either power. Despite setbacks, Carthage remained committed to Sicily, poured resources into fortifying key cities, and built new harbors to ensure swift reinforcement. Generals were appointed not only for military prowess, but for their loyalty to the ruling council back home. Unlike Rome's consuls, Carthaginian generals answered directly to the Sophites and merchant assemblies. Success in the field meant political clout in the city. Failure meant disgrace or worse. Carthage also learned from its mistakes. It began training its armies in Greek-style phalanx formations and adopted better armor for its soldiers. The navy was expanded not just in size but in quality, producing faster and more maneuverable ships capable of outflanking Greek triremes. Naval supremacy became a cornerstone of Carthaginian strategy, ensuring supply lines remained open even during long campaigns. Back home, the city itself thrived. Wealth from Spain, trade with Africa, and taxes from allied cities filled Carthaginian coffers. This wealth was not merely stored or spent on luxuries. It was invested in public works, temples, and defense. Carthage became a fortress as well as a capital, a symbol of strength built stone by stone with the profits of empire. Its society remained deeply religious. Festivals to Baal-Hamon and Tanit grew in size and splendor. The priesthood wielded great influence and often advised on matters of war and diplomacy. Sacrifices, both animal and human, were performed with solemn grandeur. Though disturbing to outsiders, these rites were central to Carthaginian identity, a reminder that success required divine favor. Meanwhile, tensions with the Greeks in Sicily continued to flare. In 480 BCE, Carthage launched a massive invasion under General Hamilcar to break Greek power once and for all. The army was vast, composed of mercenaries from across Africa, Iberia, and Gaul. It landed near Himora, a key Greek stronghold, and prepared for a decisive battle. The Greeks, led by Gelon of Syracuse, met them in open combat. What followed was one of the bloodiest battles of the ancient world. The Carthaginian army, despite its size and preparation, was defeated. Hamilcar died during the retreat, possibly in sacrifice to the gods, seeking their favor in the face of disaster. The loss at Himera was devastating. It shook the confidence of the ruling elite and exposed the limits of Carthaginian power in Sicily. The city turned inward for a time, rebuilding its forces, reassessing its goals. Yet it did not abandon the island entirely. Carthage remained a player, waiting for the right moment to strike again. In the years that followed, Carthage focused on consolidation. New colonies were established in Spain, extending control over rich mining regions and fertile lands. The city of Gadar, known today as Cadiz, became a key hub in the Western trade network. Silver, tin, and copper flowed through its ports into Carthaginian vaults. This expansion into Iberia also brought Carthage into contact with new tribes and enemies. Some were eager for trade, others for conflict. Carthaginian generals negotiated, bribed, and fought as needed, always with an eye on Rome. The two powers had not yet clashed, but the shadows of future wars were already beginning to form. In Sicily, the Greeks too faced internal strife and outside pressure. Carthage used this instability to rebuild its position, allying with local rulers and fortifying strongholds. Naval patrols resumed, and the merchant fleets sailed once more with confidence. The sea, always Carthage's ally, continued to be the city's strongest weapon. By the end of the 5th century BCE, Carthage was again ascendant. Its control of North Africa was unrivaled. Its colonies in Iberia were thriving, and its presence in Sicily, though challenged, remained resilient. The city had learned hard lessons and emerged stronger, more cautious, more prepared. But the story of Carthage was far from over. In the next chapter of its history, new leaders would rise, new wars would rage, and the ancient city would face an adversary unlike any it had encountered before. Rome was growing. Rome was watching. And soon Rome would come for Carthage. As the 4th century BCE unfolded, Carthage stood like a seasoned mariner at the helm of a ship that had weathered many storms. The city had not only survived early conflicts with the Greeks, but had emerged more refined, more resilient, and more aware of its vulnerabilities. It understood now that dominance required more than wealth and ships. It required constant vigilance, strategic alliances, and the readiness to strike when opportunity demanded. One such opportunity came when internal strife in Sicily flared again. The death of Greek tyrants and the power vacuums they left behind tempted Carthage to once again reach across the waters with its military arm. This time, however, the city acted more carefully. No longer would it rely purely on overwhelming numbers. Instead, it deployed diplomats ahead of armies, negotiated treaties before drawing swords, and built trust among the island's many discontented factions. The Carthaginian approach was slow and deliberate. Fortresses were not only garrisoned, but turned into hubs of trade and governance. The idea was simple, yet effective. If people benefited from Carthaginian presence, they were less likely to resist it. Thus, towns once hostile to Punic influence began to accept the presence of Carthaginian troops and administrators. Seeing in them stability and protection, at home, the merchant elite continued to rule, guided by tradition and tempered by experience. Elections for the soffits remained competitive, though wealth and family still held sway. Public service was seen as both an honor and a responsibility, and those who enriched the state were celebrated. Lavish ceremonies honored victories and mourned losses. Uniting citizens across social lines through shared rituals and national memory, Carthage was also evolving in its intellectual and artistic pursuits. Philosophy and science, borrowed from Greek and Egyptian traditions, found fertile ground among the Punic nobility. Texts were copied, temples adorned with new iconography, and a modest yet notable tradition of Punic literature began to emerge, focused on seafaring, commerce, and the mysteries of the gods. Yet Carthage's greatness, built on trade and diplomacy, would soon be tested by a force of a very different nature. In the Italian peninsula, a rising republic was gaining strength with astonishing speed. Rome had subdued its neighbors, fought back invaders, and unified much of central Italy under its banner. Unlike Carthage, Rome did not rely on hired soldiers or distant trade routes. Its strength came from citizen soldiers, men who fought for honor, for their land, and for the republic that promised them a share of its destiny. Though Carthage and Rome had maintained a respectful distance, their interests were slowly beginning to overlap. The island of Sicily, so often the stage for Greek and Punic drama, now drew Roman attention. Rome saw Sicily not just as a neighbor, but as a strategic necessity. Control of the island meant control of the sea between Italy and Africa. Carthage knew this well, and watched the Roman movements with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Tensions finally broke when a dispute in the small Sicilian town of Messana pulled both powers into direct confrontation. A group of mercenaries known as the Mamertines had seized the town and found themselves threatened by Syracuse, one of the last great Greek powers in Sicily. Desperate, they turned first to Rome and then to Carthage for help. Both responded, and suddenly, two giants stood face to face, their banners raised over the same patch of land. This conflict would be remembered as the First Punic War. It was unlike any war Carthage had fought before. No longer would battles be limited to skirmishes over trade routes or disputed cities. This was total war, fought across land and sea, for nothing less than supremacy in the Western Mediterranean. Rome, though new to naval warfare, adapted with terrifying speed. It built fleets modeled after captured Carthaginian ships, trained crews by rowing on dry land, and invented new boarding devices to neutralize Carthage's naval advantage. Carthaginian commanders were stunned by the audacity and resilience of Roman forces, who seemed to learn in months what others mastered over generations. The war dragged on for more than 2 decades. Cities changed hands, fleets were sunk, and thousands died. Carthage relied on its wealth to raise new armies and bribe allies, while Rome poured every ounce of its manpower into victory. The scale of destruction was immense, but the will of both sides never faltered. The final blow came at the Battle of the Eugates Islands, where Rome's rebuilt navy decisively defeated the Carthaginian fleet. Carthage, exhausted and bankrupt, sued for peace. It surrendered Sicily and paid a massive indemnity, marking the beginning of Roman dominance in the Western Mediterranean. The loss shook Carthage to its core. Never before had it faced such a determined enemy or suffered such a costly defeat. Yet even in its lowest moment, the city did not crumble. Instead, it looked westward. The Iberian Peninsula, rich in silver and opportunity, became the new frontier for Carthaginian ambition. A new generation of leaders rose, most notably the Barcid family. Amilcar Barca, a general who had fought with distinction in the final years of the war, took charge of the Iberian campaign. His mission was clear: rebuild Carthaginian power and prepare for the day when Rome would face its old rival once more. Hamilcar led his forces into Spain with precision and vision. He did not simply conquer territory. He negotiated with local tribes, founded new cities, and established a power base independent of the Carthaginian elite. His rule was both military and administrative, and it laid the groundwork for a second Carthaginian empire. His son, Hannibal, would one day inherit this legacy. But for now, Carthage was still healing. In the years following Carthage's painful loss to Rome in the First Punic War, the city shifted its gaze westward with a fierce clarity. Wounded but not broken, the Carthaginian elite entrusted their hopes to one man, Hamilcar Barca, general whose brilliance had been revealed too late in the war's final stages. Hamilcar understood that survival depended not only on recovering lost wealth, but on building new strength in lands untouched by Roman control. He turned to Iberia, where the silver flowed freely from the earth and the tribes, though proud, could be swayed by either gold or alliance. Hamilcar crossed into Iberia not as a conqueror, but as a builder. He negotiated with chiefs, offered protection in return for loyalty, and erected new Carthaginian cities where merchants could trade and armies could gather. He knew that to restore Carthage, he would need not just territory, but a foundation strong enough to resist future Roman threats. Every mine secured, every road constructed, and every alliance signed was a piece of that future. And in the quiet moments of campfires and strategy, he shaped the hearts of those around him, especially that of his young son, Hannibal. Hannibal grew up at his father's side, not in temples or schools, but on horseback, in forests, in siege camps and parades. He learned not only how to fight, but why to fight, according to tradition. Hamilcar made his son swear an oath before the gods that he would never be a friend to Rome. Whether myth or memory, that oath would shape history. Hannibal absorbed not only his father's hatred of Rome, but also his discipline, his vision, and his ability to inspire loyalty among men of every race and origin. When Hamilcar died during battle in Iberia, the mantle of leadership passed briefly to his son-in-law, Hasdrubal, and then, after Hasdrubal's assassination, to Hannibal himself. Still in his 20s, Hannibal assumed command of an army far from Carthage, surrounded by enemies and watched closely by Rome. But youth did not dull his judgment. Hannibal quickly proved that he was not merely the son of a legend, he was a force all his own. He reinforced alliances, tightened control over the mines, and expanded Carthaginian reach across the peninsula. In time, his gaze turned southward to a small Roman-allied town called Saguntum. Saguntum stood as a symbol of Roman influence beyond Italy. Though not officially part of the Roman Republic, it was under its protection, and Hannibal knew that any attack on the city would invite Roman retaliation. But he also knew that Carthage had been shackled long enough. The time for boldness had come. He laid siege to Saguntum, breaking its walls and seizing it with calculated ferocity. News of the fall rippled across the Mediterranean. In Rome, the Senate erupted in outrage. In Carthage, voices argued over whether Hannibal had gone too far. But for the young general, the die had already been cast. Rome demanded Hannibal's surrender. The Carthaginian council, torn between fear and pride, refused. With no formal declaration, the Second Punic War had begun. Yet Hannibal would not wait for Roman ships to land near Carthage. He would bring the war to their doorstep. In one of the most daring military decisions in ancient history, he gathered his army in Iberia and began the long march toward Italy. Not by sea, not along the coast, but across the towering, snow-covered Alps. No general had ever attempted such a feat with a full army, cavalry, and even war elephants. The journey was brutal, the losses staggering. Men froze, animals fell, and entire paths vanished under snow and rock. But those who survived would remember it as a miracle of leadership. For every setback, Hannibal found a solution. For every crevasse, he found a path. And at last, battered but unbroken, he descended into the northern plains of Italy, where the Romans never expected to see him. Rome scrambled to meet the threat, but Hannibal struck with a speed and cunning that left them reeling. At the Battle of Trebia, he lured them into freezing waters, where his hidden cavalry crushed their flanks. At Lake Trasimene, he set a perfect ambush, wiping out thousands in a single strike. But it was at Cannae where his brilliance became legend. There, with fewer men, he encircled a Roman force twice the size of his own and annihilated it in one of the most studied military maneuvers of all time. Rome trembled. Cities in the south defected. Allies hesitated. The Senate for a moment feared that Rome itself might fall. And yet Hannibal, for all his victories, could not break the city's core. He lacked the siege equipment, the reinforcements, and the political will from Carthage to take Rome itself. Instead, he waged a long campaign of maneuver, attempting to bleed Rome into submission. For more than a decade, he remained in Italy, undefeated on the battlefield, a ghost haunting the Republic. But Rome adapted. It learned from its defeats. It raised new armies, refused to negotiate, and shifted the war to new fronts. Under generals like Fabius Maximus, who harassed Hannibal without direct battle, and eventually Scipio Africanus, who took the fight back to Iberia and then to Africa, Rome began to turn the tide. The final confrontation came near Zama, in the plains of North Africa. Hannibal, recalled to defend his homeland, faced Scipio in a battle that would decide the fate of the ancient world. Though both generals were brilliant, it was Scipio who carried the day. Hannibal's forces broke, his war elephants scattered, and Carthage sued for peace once more.
Dale.
The Second Punic War was over. Carthage would never again be a military power. Its fleet was dismantled, its army restricted, its ambitions cut short, yet its memory endured, and Hannibal's name would echo through history as one of the greatest military minds to ever walk the earth. Carthage emerged from the Second Punic War like a lion with broken claws, fierce in memory, but restrained in reality. Its armies had been disbanded, its ships burned or surrendered, and its influence across the Mediterranean was now a ghost of its former self. Yet within the city's walls, behind the quiet docks and weathered monuments, the spirit of Carthage remained unbroken. The people did not vanish into despair, but turned inward with determination, focusing not on war, but on survival, not on glory, but on resilience. With its military shackled by treaty, Carthage invested everything into trade, agriculture, and internal prosperity. Its merchants returned to the seas, cautiously navigating routes now dominated by Roman allies. Farmers turned the fertile plains of North Africa into a breadbasket, using irrigation systems that amazed foreign visitors. The fields produced grain, olives, and fruit in abundance, and silver flowed once again into the city's coffers. In the decades that followed the war, Carthage experienced a strange renaissance. quiet blooming beneath the shadow of defeat. It was no longer a rival to Rome, but it was still a city of wealth and purpose. This rebirth, however, stirred jealousy and suspicion. In Rome, many senators saw Carthage's economic recovery not as a testament to peace, but as a threat in disguise. Chief among these was Cato the Elder, a rigid defender of Roman tradition and a tireless voice of warning. At the end of every speech in the Senate, regardless of the topic, Cato would end with the same chilling phrase, "Carthage must be destroyed." His obsession with the city's resurgence turned into a campaign of fear, and his words began to find eager ears. Carthage, for its part, tried to avoid provocation. It abided by the terms of peace, avoided military action, and even asked Rome for mediation when border disputes arose with its neighbors, particularly the aggressive Numidian king Massinissa. But Rome rarely intervened in Carthage's favor. Massinissa, once Hannibal's ally and now Rome's client, chipped away at Carthaginian territory, provoking skirmishes and testing boundaries. Carthage's patience was eventually exhausted. When Massinissa invaded yet again, and Rome ignored its pleas, Carthage finally raised an army without Roman permission, breaking the treaty. That act, driven by desperation rather than defiance, gave Rome the excuse it had long awaited. A formal declaration of war followed, and Roman legions once again sailed across the sea toward Africa. But this time, their goal was not negotiation or humiliation. It was annihilation. Carthage, realizing too late the gravity of its situation, attempted to appease the invaders. It handed over hostages, weapons, and even dismantled its outer defenses. The Romans demanded more. They ordered the entire population to abandon the city and relocate inland, far from the coast. Carthage refused, would not die quietly. So began the Third Punic War, a siege not of battles in faraway lands, but of total destruction. Carthage, with no allies, surrounded by Roman legions, and lacking a professional army, prepared for a final stand. Every citizen became a soldier. Women cut their hair to make ropes. Slaves and nobles worked side by side in forges, producing weapons around the clock. The harbor was blocked, but the Carthaginians secretly dug a new channel and launched a small fleet in a last act of defiance. The resistance shocked the Romans, who expected an easy conquest. Instead, they found a city that refused to surrender. The siege dragged on for 3 brutal years. Disease ravaged the defenders. Starvation crept through the streets. Fires burned night and day as both sides hurled destruction upon one another. The Roman general Scipio Aemilianus, the adopted grandson of Scipio Africanus, took command and intensified the assault. His troops breached the walls, but the fighting only grew more savage. Street by street, house by house, Carthaginians resisted. Even as death approached, they fought not for victory, but for honor and memory. In the final days, the Temple of Eshmon, the high citadel, became the last sanctuary. Thousands took refuge there, unwilling to face capture. When the Romans broke through, the temple was set ablaze, consuming the last defenders in fire and smoke. The city was finally silent. Scipio, standing among the ruins, is said to have wept, not out of mercy, but out of awe. For he knew that in destroying... After the defeat at Zama, Carthage was a city stripped of its empire, bound by treaty, and forced to walk beneath the heel of Roman suspicion. It was no longer allowed to raise armies without Rome's consent, no longer allowed to defend itself even against African raiders. Yet it was not dead. Within its walls, commerce resumed. The harbors bustled with trade, the workshops fired their kilns, and silver once again filled the city's vaults. Carthage had been wounded, but it had not been destroyed, and in that endurance Rome saw danger. The decades passed, but Roman memory was long. Hannibal's ghost haunted their minds. Even as the Senate ruled, new provinces and legions marched across new frontiers. There remained in the hearts of some Romans a hatred, a dread, a hunger for finality. Chief among them was Cato the Elder, a statesman who ended every speech, regardless of topic, with the same chilling phrase, "Carthage must be destroyed." And yet Carthage did nothing to provoke war. It honored every clause of the peace treaty, paid its debts ahead of schedule, and refrained from building fleets or fortresses. But trouble found it anyway. The neighboring kingdom of Numidia, ruled by Rome's ally Massinissa, began to raid Carthaginian lands, seize border towns, and harass its farmers. Carthage, forbidden to wage war, appealed to Rome for justice. Rome did nothing. Year after year, Massinissa pushed deeper, and Carthage's patience wore thin. Finally, when the attacks became unbearable, the city struck back, sending troops to defend its own borders. That single act, defending its territory, was the excuse Rome had long waited for. The Senate declared that Carthage had broken the treaty. War was inevitable. Carthage tried to surrender. Its leaders begged for peace. Rome responded with impossible demands. Carthage must disarm, surrender its weapons, deliver hostages, and move the entire population inland, away from the sea that had given it life. The people were stunned. To abandon their city was to abandon their soul. They refused. So began the Third Punic War. Rome sent an army to Africa and laid siege to Carthage. The city, surrounded by walls, resisted fiercely. It reforged old weapons, trained every citizen, even the young and the old. Women cut their hair to make ropes for siege engines. Slaves were freed to fight. Every street became a fortress, every home a battleground. The siege lasted for 3 years. The Romans breached the harbor, burned ships, and cut supply lines. Slowly, block by block, they advanced. Carthage bled, starved, and still refused to fall. But no city could resist forever. In 146 BCE, the walls were broken. The final assault was brutal. Fires consumed temples, blood filled the streets, tens of thousands died. The survivors were enslaved, the city was leveled. The land was cursed, or so the legend goes. Salt was said to have been sown into the soil so that nothing would grow again. Whether true or not, the message was clear. Carthage was to be erased, not just from maps, but from memory. Yet memory is stubborn. Carthage, even in ruin, lived on in the fears and glories of Rome. Its story became a warning, a tale of pride, brilliance, and defiance. It had dared to rise, dared to challenge, and had paid the price. But before it fell, Carthage had ruled the sea, outsmarted armies, and given the world one of its greatest military minds. Its harbor walls may have crumbled, but its legacy endures. Whispered in the winds over Tunisia, remembered in the books of historians, and etched in the long shadow it once cast across the Mediterranean. The fires had barely cooled, and the ashes of Carthage still clung to the winds when Roman surveyors arrived to measure what remained. Rubble was mapped, walls were traced, and once sacred temples were reduced to markers on a ledger. For Rome, the war was over, but the idea of Carthage refused to die. Even as it lay in ruins, the city held a strange power. Its fall became legend. Senators quoted its fate in speeches. Generals pointed to its destruction as the final answer to resistance. The site was left empty, a scar of power, but scars do not disappear. They harden. For over a century, the ground remained unsettled. Carthage became a memory, a ghost beside the sea. And yet in time, Rome began to see opportunity where it had once seen only threat. The site, after all, was perfect. It had harbors, fertile plains, and a central position in the Mediterranean. As the empire grew and provinces demanded better administration, Rome needed a city in Africa, not to fear, but to control. In 46 BCE, Julius Caesar, conqueror of Gaul and dictator of Rome, ordered that Carthage be rebuilt. He had seen the future in its ashes. He imagined not the old city reborn, but a Roman colony raised from its bones. Though his assassination delayed the plan, the vision lived on. Under Augustus, Rome's first emperor, a new city rose atop the ruins. They called it Colonia Julia Carthago. But this was no mere outpost. The new Carthage flourished with Roman villas, forums, amphitheaters, and baths. Temples were raised not to Baal Hammon, but to Jupiter and Mars. Latin replaced Punic in law and in laughter. Roman engineers built aqueducts to carry water across vast distances. Roman merchants brought grain and marble. Roman settlers walked streets that once trembled under siege, yet beneath the marble and mosaics the past remained. Locals remembered. Some whispered the name Dido. Others told stories of Hannibal's vow. Children played near the old docks, unaware they were walking on history. Traders spoke in Latin, but still traced routes once pioneered by Punic captains. The new Carthage was Roman in stone, but layered with older memory. As centuries passed, Carthage became the beating heart of Roman Africa. It rivaled Alexandria in size and influence. Senators were elected from its population. Christian bishops preached from its pulpits. Philosophers debated in its academies. One such voice was Tertullian, an early Christian writer born in Roman Carthage, whose words would echo through church history. Another, Augustine of Hippo, studied in the city before becoming one of the most influential thinkers in Christian theology. By the 4th century CE, Carthage had transformed again. Now it was no longer simply Roman, it was Christian. Churches replaced temples. Pagan rituals gave way to baptismal fonts. But power still clung to the city like sea salt. It remained a symbol of survival, a city that had died and risen. Yet history, relentless as the tides, brought new storms. A Germanic tribe swept from the forests of Europe, crossed into Africa in the 5th century. In 439 CE, they captured Carthage. It was a stunning blow to the Roman world. A city once burned by Rome now stood as the capital of a new kingdom, ruled by those who had once been dismissed as barbarians. Under King Gaiseric, the Vandals made Carthage their own, turning it into a base from which they launched raids across the sea, even sacking Rome itself in 455. But the Vandals could not hold the future forever. In 533 CE, under Emperor Justinian, the Eastern Roman Empire, known now as Byzantium, sent General Belisarius to reclaim lost lands. Carthage fell once more, this time to Greek-speaking Romans from Constantinople. The city was patched, ruled, and slowly absorbed into the world of Byzantium. The centuries that followed were quieter, but no less complex. The rise of Islam in the 7th century brought Arab armies across North Africa. In 698 CE, Carthage was captured and burned again. This time, its destruction was nearly complete. The Arab conquerors moved inland, founding a new capital at Kairouan. Carthage, once the queen of the sea, was left to the wind and time. But no ruin is ever truly silent. Stones remember. Today, the ruins of Carthage still rest by the blue waters of the Tunisian coast. Tourists walk its broken walls. Scholars uncover its layers. The call of traders, the shouts of soldiers, the prayers of priests, all echo faintly in the dust. Carthage was a city of cycles. Built, burned, rebuilt, and reimagined. It began as a refuge, rose as an empire, fell as a threat, and lived again as a jewel of Rome. In its bones are the stories of merchants and mothers, conquerors and captives, gods old and new. And though the salt may no longer poison its soil, the memory of Carthage still burns bright, not as a caution, but as a legacy. Carthage never truly died. Though its walls crumbled and its temples fell, it lived on in memory, in words, in warnings. For centuries after its destruction, Rome could not let it go. Poets, historians, and orators returned again and again to its story, haunted by what it represented. To some, Carthage was the enemy that had once brought Rome to the brink. To others, it was a symbol of defiance, pride, and the tragic cost of greatness. Virgil, the great Roman poet, carved Carthage into the heart of Roman identity. In his epic, the Aeneid, he placed Dido, the city's legendary founder, at the center of a doomed romance with Aeneas, the mythical ancestor of Rome. Their love was fierce, sudden, and cursed. When Aeneas left her to fulfill his destiny, Dido stood on her funeral pyre and cursed his people forever. In Virgil's hands, the seeds of the Punic Wars were not political, but emotional, born of betrayal and loss. The fall of Carthage became not just a historical fact, but a literary prophecy written in flame and tears. Roman historians like Livy and Appian chronicled the Punic Wars in painstaking detail. They described the rise of Hannibal, the devastation of Italy, the destruction of the city in 146 BCE, but even as they wrote of Roman triumph, there was always a shadow of fear. They knew what it had taken to win. They knew that Carthage had come closer than any other power to ending Rome's dream. Centuries passed and empires fell, but Carthage remained a word of weight. Medieval monks copied its history in quiet scriptoria. Arab scholars debated the causes of its fall. Renaissance thinkers saw it as a lesson in pride and downfall. Enlightenment philosophers studied its political systems and marveled at its naval power. Even modern generals planning campaigns in distant deserts walked among its ruins and felt its presence. In Tunisia, where Carthage once stood, the soil is still rich and red. Olive trees grow where palaces once towered. The air carries salt from the same sea that bore Carthaginian ships to the ends of the known world. Locals walk ancient roads unaware of the myths beneath their feet. Yet the legacy lingers in the stones, in the mosaics, in the fragments of amphorae dug from the earth. Carthage lives on not just as a place, but as an idea. It represents a civilization built not on conquest, but on connection. A city that mastered the sea, traded with strangers, and blended cultures with skill and tolerance. It reminds us that power can wear many faces, that empires rise not only by the sword, but through ships and spice, silver and diplomacy, and yet its story is also one of caution. It shows what happens when one power refuses to accept the strength of another, when fear becomes policy, memory becomes justification for annihilation. Carthage is the warning whispered beneath the triumphs of history that no city, no matter how grand, is safe from envy, ambition, or the need to erase. Today, museums across the world hold artifacts from Carthage, coins stamped with Punic gods, jewelry made with Phoenician glass, stone tablets inscribed with prayers to long-forgotten deities. In classrooms, students still read of Hannibal crossing the Alps, of Dido's curse, of Rome's relentless march. Filmmakers, authors, and artists return to the story again and again, each finding something new in its ashes. In this way, Carthage endures. Not as a ruin, but as a reminder. It stands for resilience, for vision, for the fragile dance between power and destruction. It is both warning and wonder, a city that refused to be forgotten, a name that still stirs the soul. And so, the story ends where it began, on a stretch of African coast, where once a queen cut an ox hide into strips and claimed the earth for her people. From that clever act rose a civilization that shaped the ancient world and echoes through time. Carthage may have fallen, but its memory stands unshaken. The fires had died, but the ash remained. Where once Carthage had stood, proud and defiant, there was now only rubble and silence. Columns lay broken, like snapped bones, streets turned to dust, and the harbor, once filled with the music of trade and the scent of distant goods, stood choked with wreckage and rot. The wind moved through what was left of temples and homes, not to carry the prayers of its people, but to scatter the whispers of their end. Rome had not simply won a war. It had committed an erasure. City's defenders had fought to the last brick, and for that, they were punished with total annihilation. But destruction was never the end for Rome. In the wake of conquest, the conqueror always planned something new. Though the land was declared cursed, time softened Roman will as much as it did the scorched ground. Decades later, Rome would return to this forsaken place, not as an enemy, but as a builder. Under Julius Caesar, the first ideas of rebuilding Carthage were planted. Under Augustus, these plans gained life. A new city was founded atop the old one, a Roman Carthage built from the stones of its Punic ancestor, its streets aligned with Roman order, its architecture carved in imperial ambition. This new Carthage was no longer Phoenician in soul, but it remained shaped by the ghosts it stood upon. Colonists were brought in from across the empire. Veterans were given plots of land. Statues of Roman gods replaced the old shrines, but the foundation beneath them still pulsed with the history of a civilization that had once rivaled Rome itself. The new city prospered, not with the fierce independence of its predecessor, but with the stability of Roman favor. It became one of the most important cities in Africa, a center of grain, trade, and eventually Christian thought. Yet the memory of the old Carthage lingered, more powerful than any temple or column. Roman poets wrote of Hannibal with grudging awe. Philosophers pondered the fate of cities that dared to dream beyond their place. In the schools of rhetoric, young minds were trained using the history of Carthage as both a warning and a puzzle. How had such a great power fallen so completely? Was it because it had challenged Rome, or because its foundations were always doomed to crack under ambition? Even among the people of North Africa, memories endured. Though the Punic language faded from everyday use, Traces of it remained in local dialects for centuries. Traditions survived, sometimes repurposed, sometimes hidden in plain sight. The cultural echo of Carthage became part of the identity of the land itself. Absorbed but not erased, like ink spread thin, but never wiped clean. In time, Christian bishops walked the streets where once priests of Balhaman had lit fires to the gods. Carthage became a center of the early church, its name spoken again not as an enemy, but as a bishopric, a city of faith. It hosted councils, it produced saints, and it once more held a voice in the affairs of the Mediterranean. Augustine of Hippo, writing from nearby, would mention Carthage often, seeing in its past both tragedy and instruction for a new world of spirit over empire. But the ruins never stopped speaking. Travelers who passed through the region wrote of strange walls buried beneath fields of fallen statues half consumed by time. The bones of the old city refused to disappear. They were reminders of a time when Africa was not Rome's frontier, but the seat of a kingdom born from exile, built on cleverness and hardened by war. Archaeologists centuries later would dig into that earth and find amphorae, coins, inscriptions, and ash. Every shovel of soil brought pieces of Carthage back to light, each artifact another voice in a chorus that Rome could not completely silence. This was the paradox of Carthage. It died a final death in fire, but its memory refused burial. Its name, its myths, and its defiance lived on in the very empire that had destroyed it. Rome had sought to end Carthage forever, but in doing so, it gave Carthage a second life in story. In legend, and in the eternal dance between power and pride, as Roman Carthage rose from the ashes, it became something its predecessor had never been. A reflection of Roman civilization planted firmly on African soil. The streets no longer echoed with Punic merchants or cries to Baal, but with Latin voices, Roman magistrates, and the rhythms of imperial life. The grid of the new city followed the strict geometry of Roman planning, with forums, bathhouses, temples, and aqueducts stretching across the rebuilt landscape like veins in a living body. Yet beneath those stones, the old Carthage whispered, buried but never silent, its monuments stood atop ancient tombs. Every step taken in the new city was a step over the bones of the old. Roman engineers did what Rome always did best. They took destruction and turned it into order. They drained the land, carved roads outward from the city center, and filled the ports with ships that carried African grain to every corner of the empire. North Africa became Rome's breadbasket. Fields of wheat stretched as far as the eye could see. Olive trees bent beneath the weight of harvest. In the marketplace of Carthage, spices, ivory, textiles, and glass passed hands in the shadow of grand basilicas. The city, once cursed and ruined, now buzzed with life, wealth, and imperial prestige. By the reign of Augustus, Carthage had become a city reborn. It was no longer merely a colony, it was declared a municipium, and later granted full colonial status. With each title came more autonomy, more Roman settlers, and more wealth. Theaters rose beside ancient Punic walls. Statues of emperors towered above streets that had once seen Hannibal's warriors march in triumph. Gladiators spilled blood where once generals gave speeches. Temples to Jupiter and Juno stood where shrines to Tanit and Balhaman had been. But the gods of Carthage were not forgotten. In the countryside, in whispered rites, some still lit fires for the old spirits, still buried offerings in the soil, still honored the names Rome had tried to erase. Carthage became a magnet for scholars, artists, and politicians. The climate was mild. The land was fertile. The city was large enough to impress and wealthy enough to provide. Roman aristocrats built summer villas on the hills surrounding the city. African elites, once Punic in blood, now Latin in tongue, sent their sons to Rome and their daughters to marry into senatorial lines. The scars of the Punic Wars were not healed, but buried under layers of new ambition. The new Carthaginians did not forget their past. They simply rebranded it under Roman names and Roman gods. But even as Roman Carthage flourished, a quiet storm was gathering. In back rooms and alleyways, in homes and underground chambers, a new faith was spreading, one that refused to honor the Roman gods, that preached the equality of slaves and masters, men and women, rich and poor. Christianity took hold in Carthage with startling speed. The city's diversity, wealth, and openness made it a fertile ground for new ideas. Pagan temples still stood, but more and more homes held crosses carved in secret, prayers whispered in Latin, Greek, and Punic. By the late 2nd century, Carthage had become one of the most important Christian centers in the Western Empire. Churches rose where shrines had been. Catacombs filled with martyrs who had refused to bend before Rome's altars. Blood once shed for the gods now soaked the earth in the name of Christ. Among the voices to rise from this spiritual battle was Tertullian, a fierce, brilliant writer and theologian. He penned treatises in defense of the faith, challenged the empire's persecution of Christians, and helped shape the very foundations of Western theology. His Latin was sharp, elegant, and fearless. He called Rome's spectacles vulgar, its gods false, its emperors mortal. He told Christians to stand firm, to refuse the sword, and to prepare for fire. Carthage had become not just a Roman city, but a Christian one, and from that transformation, it gained a new identity. It was no longer defined by its ancient hatred of Rome, but by its role as a spiritual beacon. Bishops from Carthage debated doctrine with counterparts from Alexandria and Antioch. Councils were held, heresies condemned. The city, once feared as a rival of Rome, now served as its moral compass in times of doubt. The prosperity of Roman Carthage endured for centuries. Its population swelled. Its mosaics glittered. Its schools produced thinkers who would go on to shape the empire's policies. Augustine of Hippo, one of the greatest minds of the early church, studied in Carthage before beginning his own theological journey. He walked its streets, debated in its forums, and later wrote of its temptations and beauty with both admiration and sorrow. But time, like tide, erodes even the strongest walls. As the Western Empire began to falter in the 4th and 5th centuries, Carthage felt the tremors. The wealth that had once flowed through its ports slowed. The Roman legions thinned. Corruption and infighting in Rome left Africa exposed. And in 439 CE, the city fell. Not to Rome's enemies across the sea, but to new powers rising from within. The Vandals, a Germanic tribe that had crossed from Spain into Africa, captured Carthage with barely a fight. The Roman administration fled. The churches fell silent. The baths went cold. But Carthage survived once again. Under Vandal rule, it became the capital of a new kingdom. Its harbor filled again. Its palaces housed new kings. Though the Vandals were seen as barbarians by Roman historians, they adopted many Roman customs and maintained the city's infrastructure. Yet tensions remained. The Vandals were Arians, a Christian sect condemned by the Roman Church, and persecuted the Nicene Christians of Carthage. Bishops were exiled. Churches were seized. Once more, Carthage became a city of resistance and quiet rebellion, though this time the enemy wore no Roman badge. Eventually, in the 6th century, the Eastern Roman Empire, what we now call Byzantium, launched a campaign to reclaim the lost western provinces. Led by the general Belisarius, Byzantine forces recaptured Carthage in 533 CE after a brief but decisive war. The city rejoiced for a moment. Roman rule, or at least its eastern form, had returned. The banners of Constantinople replaced those of the Vandals. Imperial governors took residence in the old palaces. Carthage was once again a Roman city, but it was a shadow of its former self. The centuries that followed were years of slow decline. Earthquakes shook its walls. Trade routes shifted. The once vibrant schools and churches emptied. And in the 7th century, the final blow came. Arab armies swept across North Africa. In 698 CE, Carthage fell for the last time. The city was burned, looted, and abandoned. Its stones were dragged away to build new cities. Its temples crumbled. Its libraries vanished. What remained was silence. But even then, Carthage did not truly vanish. Its story lived on in the memory of empires, in the debates of scholars, in the pages of books that survived the flames. Rome had destroyed it once, Vandals had seized it later, Byzantines had tried to reclaim it, but no one ever truly erased it, as Carthage had risen from ashes before, and though its walls may never rise again, its legend endures. Long after its last stone had crumbled, long after its harbors had filled with silt, and its temples lay buried under centuries of silence, the memory of Carthage refused to die. It lingered in the dreams of scholars, haunted the chronicles of empires, and lived on in every story that ever told of lost greatness. Though the city had vanished from maps, it remained etched into the consciousness of civilization like a scar left by fire. Painful, powerful, unforgettable. During the Middle Ages, Carthage became a place of legend, its true history blurred with myth. European travelers and Arab chroniclers spoke of the ruins on the Tunisian coast with awe and uncertainty. Some claim the stones still whispered to the wind, that ancient voices echoed in the catacombs. Others believed it had been cursed forever, punished by heaven for its pride, but few truly knew what had once stood there. The libraries were gone, the scripts were silent, and all that remained were broken columns and fragments of shattered walls. Yet even those fragments had stories to tell. When Islamic scholars mapped North Africa, they noted the location of Carthage, a name still rooted in the Punic Cart God Act, meaning new city. Locals walked among its ruins unaware that their olive groves grew where senators once debated and children once learned to sail. Shepherds led their flocks over buried forums. Rainwater filled forgotten cisterns. Time had covered Carthage, but it had not erased it. In Europe, the Renaissance reignited a hunger for lost knowledge. As ancient Roman texts were rediscovered, the story of Carthage returned. Livy Polybius Appian. These voices from the classical past told of Hannibal's march, of naval conquests, of a city burned to ash and reborn in stone. Artists painted its fall. Poets wept for its fate. Scholars debated whether Rome had been just or monstrous in its final assault. And with that rediscovery came a new question. What remained? The 19th century brought answers. European explorers and archaeologists, driven by curiosity and empire, arrived in Tunisia. They dug into the earth with shovels and maps, uncovering mosaics, amphorae, temples, and tombs. Slowly, painfully, Carthage emerged again. Not as a myth, but as a city made of stone and story. Beneath Roman layers, they found Punic ruins. Foundations of homes built centuries before Caesar was born. Altars to gods whose names had been cursed by Roman pens. French archaeologists mapped the city's outlines, tracing its harbors, its sanctuaries, and its marketplaces. They found coins bearing the face of Dido, ceramics glazed with Punic symbols, and walls scorched by the fires of Rome. They uncovered the Tophet, a burial ground long shrouded in controversy, and debated its meaning, whether it bore witness to sacrifice, disease, or simply the ancient pain of childhood death. The debate continues, but the discoveries are undeniable. Carthage was real. It had lived. It had breathed. Though Rome had tried to erase it, it had failed. Modern Carthage is a quiet place, nestled on the Mediterranean coast, suburb of Tunis. Its hills are green, its beaches calm. Tourists walk where once soldiers bled. Locals sell fruit in markets that stand where Punic ships once docked. The ruins are modest now, scattered across gardens and neighborhoods. There is no vast acropolis, no towering ziggurat. But there is presence, a stillness that hums with memory. The stones remember, and those who walk among them feel it. Carthage has become a symbol, not just of tragedy, but of resilience. It is a story of how greatness rises, how it stumbles, and how memory can outlast flame. Historians now teach not only of Hannibal's tactics, but of Carthage's science, its literature, its contributions to navigation and trade. New generations learn that it was not just a city of war, but a city of knowledge, innovation, and beauty. Its legacy also lives in language. The word Punic still survives. The term Carthaginian peace still means destruction, disguised as justice. And every time a story is told of a nation that rose too fast, shined too bright, and threatened the powers of the world, Carthage returns. In recent decades, UNESCO has protected the ruins. Tunisian scholars have reclaimed its history, not as a foreign past, but as a native one. Museums hold artifacts that once belonged to traders, generals, and children who lived before Christ walked the earth. And as the sun sets over the Gulf of Tunis, shadows stretch across the ruins, painting them gold and red, as if the city still burns, not with fire, but with memory. Carthage may no longer command fleets or rival Rome, but it commands attention. It reminds us that no empire lasts forever, that greatness can be fragile, and that even in ruin, beauty endures. It whispers of ancient queens and lost battles, of forgotten prayers and eternal dreams. And it asks us, gently but firmly, to remember. Carthage was not only a center of trade and warfare, but also a powerful hub of religion, ritual, and cultural expression. Long before the arrival of Roman gods or Christian martyrs, Carthage bowed to ancient deities inherited from its Phoenician roots. Chief among them was Baal-Hamun, a god of weather, prosperity, and time. Worshipped with fervent offerings and complex rites, alongside him stood Tanit, the celestial goddess of fertility and motherhood, often depicted with upraised hands in the crescent moon. Their symbols adorned temples and coins, and their names were invoked in every major ceremony that bound city and citizen in sacred duty. The rituals of Carthage shocked outsiders, especially the Romans and Greeks, who accused the city of practicing child sacrifice. Archaeological evidence remains debated, but the Tophet, a vast burial ground filled with urns containing the ashes of infants and animals, suggests the presence of a deep and intense religious tradition, one that may have demanded the highest price during times of great crisis. To the Carthaginians, such offerings were not barbaric but sacred, a means to secure divine favor in war, famine, and political uncertainty. Carthage's religious life was not confined to the elite. From noble households to working-class quarters, small shrines, altars, and votive offerings revealed a society saturated with spiritual belief. People offered prayers for safe sea voyages, fertile harvests, and family well-being. Pilgrims from surrounding colonies traveled to Carthage to celebrate festivals and receive blessings. The city's temples were grand and strategically placed, often on hills or near harbors, signaling divine protection over commerce and conquest alike. When Rome destroyed the city in 146 BCE, its temples were burned and its priesthood scattered. But faith does not vanish with fire. Centuries later, when Rome planted a colony atop the ashes of Carthage, new gods came, and with them, new believers. By the 2nd century CE, Carthage became one of the most important centers of early Christianity in the Western Roman world. The city that once honored Baal now echoed with hymns to Christ. This transformation did not erase the past, but layered it. Pagan temples were repurposed as churches. Sacred groves became cemeteries. The old rhythms of pilgrimage and ritual continued, now directed toward saints instead of ancient gods. Carthage's natural role as a cultural crossroads gave it strength as a Christian stronghold. Its bishops were eloquent, educated, and politically astute. Among them rose Tertullian, the fierce theologian who coined the Latin phrase Trinitas to describe the Christian Trinity. His writings shaped doctrine for centuries and gave voice to African Christianity at a time when Rome still looked westward for religious authority. Later came Cyprian, bishop and martyr, who guided the Carthaginian church during times of persecution and plague. His letters reveal a church both devout and deeply human, struggling with unity, sacrifice, and courage under pressure. Through their leadership, Carthage became a seat of resistance and revival, producing a lineage of saints, thinkers, and clerics who would shape both doctrine and devotion. Even under Vandal rule in the 5th century, Carthage did not lose its spiritual edge. The Vandals were Arian Christians, considered heretics by Rome, and their reign brought tension and conflict within the church. Yet the city remained a spiritual battleground, its streets echoing with the voices of debate, liturgy, and defiance. In time, Carthage would fall again, this time 2 Arab armies, but even then, its cultural legacy persisted in memory and manuscript. What survived was not only a name, but an inheritance. The resilience of its people, the richness of its traditions, and the transformation of its spiritual life from Baal to Christ made Carthage more than just a city. It became a symbol of how civilizations evolve, how cultures survive conquest, and how faith reshapes even the ruins of empire. Carthage's story did not end in flames or in chains. After the Roman conquest, the land where temples once stood and markets once roared with commerce was too valuable, too strategic, and too soaked in memory to remain silent forever. In time, Rome rebuilt it not to honor its enemy, but to serve its own ambitions. The new city, formerly named Colonia Julia Carthago, was planted upon the ashes. Roman veterans were settled there, marble temples were raised over Punic ruins, and Latin replaced Punic as the voice of power. But cultures never vanish cleanly. Beneath the new forums, old stones remained. Beneath Latin prayers, older gods still whispered in local tongues. Carthaginian families, though diminished and scattered, slowly returned and adapted, weaving their old customs into Roman rule. The city spirit persisted, reshaped but not erased. By the 2nd century CE, Carthage had once again become one of the largest cities in Africa, and a jewel in Rome's imperial crown. It was now fully Roman in architecture and law, but remained Punic in blood and memory. This fusion gave birth to a unique society, one that would play a pivotal role in the next. Transformation of the Mediterranean world, the rise of Christianity. In Carthage, Christianity did not arrive as a gentle wave. It surged in with urgency, powered by traveling teachers, hidden texts, and the hunger of people searching for something beyond empire and law. The Christian church took root fast, its growth fed by Carthage's long-standing role as a center of communication and culture. The city, used to balancing east and west, gods and merchants, now gave stage to prophets and martyrs. Churches appeared, first in houses, then in public buildings. Debates flourished, not with swords, but with scrolls. Tertullian, born in Carthage around 155 CE, stood at the center of this firestorm. A lawyer turned theologian, he brought a fierce and uncompromising voice to early Christianity. He argued that the blood of martyrs was the seed of the church, and that Rome's brutality only proved the strength of faith. His writing, sharp as steel, shaped the Christian mind for generations. In time, Carthage became a battleground of doctrines. Some followed the mainstream, others broke into sects that Rome called heretical. Among them, the Donatists fought for a pure and untainted church, refusing to forgive clergy who had betrayed the faith during persecution. Their base of power, the deep countryside around Carthage, where old Carthaginian independence still breathed through Christian tongues. Under Roman Christian emperors, Carthage grew even more influential. Its bishops became powerful figures. Its councils helped define orthodox doctrine, and its congregations swelled. Cyprian, another Carthaginian bishop, would die as a martyr during Roman persecution, but his letters would become central to church administration and unity. He did not just lead a flock, gave structure to a movement destined to outlast empires. Even after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, when the Vandals swept in and seized Carthage, the city did not sink into silence. The Vandals, Arian Christians who believed in a different interpretation of Christ's nature, clashed with the local Catholic majority. Churches were seized, bishops exiled, and persecution resumed, but the faithful endured, just as they had under earlier tyrants. When the Byzantines reconquered Carthage in the 6th century, it once again became a beacon of imperial order. Roads were repaired, walls rebuilt, and the city remained a cornerstone of African Christianity. But the sands of power had already shifted elsewhere. Byzantium could not hold Africa forever. In the 7th century, Arab forces arrived, carrying not just swords but a new faith, Islam. Carthage, once again a target, was besieged, captured, and burned. This time, there would be no Roman colony to rise from the ashes. The city was stripped for stone, its harbors buried, its name slowly fading from the lips of those who once worshipped and traded under its sun. And yet Carthage did not vanish. In every page of history where Christianity spread through North Africa, her name echoed. In every council where doctrine was forged, her bishops were remembered. In every debate about empire and faith, martyrdom and resilience, the spirit of the city remained. Carthage was not just a place. It was a civilization that rose, fell, adapted, and transformed. It was a vessel that carried gods, goods, and gospel across the centuries. And though the winds buried her stones, they could not bury the memory of what she had been. Long after its walls crumbled and its harbors fell silent, Carthage remained a presence in the imagination of the world. It lived on not as a ruin alone, but as a symbol of ambition, resistance, genius, and tragic loss. Empires had destroyed it, but none had erased it. The name Carthage whispered through Roman literature, often with bitterness, sometimes with awe. In Roman classrooms, children recited tales of Hannibal's boldness, of Cato's warnings, and of Scipio's grim victory. They learned to fear Carthage as a warning, to remember it as a rival who nearly toppled Rome at its peak. Historians wrestled with its memory. Some cast it as a villain, a city of greed, cruelty, and dark rituals. Others defended it as noble, innovative, and wrongfully crushed. Generations of scholars debated whether its destruction was a necessary act of survival or a brutal overreach driven by fear and vengeance. Beneath the dust of centuries, Carthage gave more than war stories. Its influence on trade, naval engineering, architecture, agriculture, and governance seeded ideas across the Mediterranean. It shaped the ways cities interacted, the rhythms of commerce, and even the evolution of language. Punic words made their way into Latin. Carthaginian farming techniques were adopted by Roman estates. In subtle ways, Rome became more like Carthage after destroying it. Even the spiritual world remembered. In the rise of Christianity, Carthage had birthed some of the most important thinkers of the early church. It gave Christianity martyrs, writers, bishops, and revolutions of thought. The echoes of Tertullian and Cyprian outlasted stone temples and harbor walls. Carthage became legend. Medieval travelers spoke of its lost riches. Renaissance artists painted its final battle. Philosophers cited it as an example of tragic greatness. It entered the poetry of ruins, alongside Troy and Babylon, as a city that fell not from weakness, but from greatness, taken too far. In modern times, archaeologists uncovered its secrets. Streets reappeared beneath the sand. Burial grounds and altars emerged, hinting at customs once obscured by Roman bias. The voice of Carthage, once muted, began to return in shards of pottery, carved inscriptions, and hidden chambers. Carthage teaches us that greatness is not measured only in victories. Sometimes it is measured in the echo left behind. In the resilience of a people who rebuilt after ruin, in the brilliance of minds that challenged empires, in the power of a story that refuses to fade. Its ashes fed the roots of countless futures. Its fall warned generations of what ambition could cost. Its triumphs reminded the world of what trade, courage, and intelligence could achieve. Carthage was more than an opponent of Rome. It was a world power that created its own order. A sea empire forged not by legions, but by sails. A city that dared to stand alone against fate itself. And though Rome won the war, history has remembered them both. One for its endurance, the other for its defiance. Carthage endures, not in stone, but in memory.